Today, my guest is Andy Tough Problems Balan. You have seen Andy in previous episodes, or you might know Andy for his excellent series of videos about teaching Rust. He helped us do giant leaps forward with threads and encryption errors, also known as unable to decrypt. He already spent some time thinking about what to do with matrix state that can really grow over time, and many more problems because Andy loves problems. He is still working on most of these, not all of these, but another problem caught his attention. This time, Andy is interested in one of the components of the fabric of the universe, time. Or more precisely, Andy is interested in how we perceive the past. You're watching Matrix Live, and we're going to talk about stitched history. Andy, welcome, or should I say, welcome back.
Thank you very much. Good to speak to you again.
Yeah, nice to see you. People love the videos where you explain all the things because you are really good at breaking down why things break down. So,
Thank you. I'll do my best.
one of the many selling points of Matrix is having history shared across devices. And the problem you're tackling is related to history. So, at a very high level, what is wrong with Matrix history right now, and why can it be wrong?
Yeah, really we're talking about the order in which things happened. So fundamentally, because Matrix is so cool, right, that it's like a distributed, federated system, no one's in charge of, there's no central point where someone says, this is what really happened. So different things can happen at different times from different viewpoints. So a different server might see the events from users who are connecting to that server happen earlier, and then that server might be disconnected from some other server. So things that happened ages ago don't actually come through the internet till much later. So the kind of fundamental to Matrix, there's this problem of what happened before what, and that in some ways that's like not a solvable problem, but in some ways it causes additional problems uh, that we don't need to have. So the particular problem, and there's a blog post that you might want to link to that I wrote a while ago, where I went into some detail about like what's wrong with the order of messages in Matrix at the moment. And the basic problem is there are two ways of getting hold of messages or events. If you're the programmer of a Matrix client that is showing stuff to a user, there's two different ways you can get hold of messages. Either you can use the what's called the sync API, which is essentially like tell me what's happening right now, or keep me up to date with live stuff. And then there's a bunch of other APIs that tell you like what happened in the past, or what messages are near this message, or what messages are related to this message, what messages are there in a thread, things like that. Um, and really, basically, it's kind of an accident of history. Those two different ways of getting hold of messages give them to you in different orders. So if you're getting live events, you just get them as they arrive at the server. But if you get hold of events later in the past, then they come back to you in a different order. Um, and that is, um, it's a problem just kind of fundamentally, like when you're looking back at stuff that happened in the past, suddenly it looks like it happened in a different order from when you read those messages originally. But it also has some knock-on effects, and the worst knock-on effect is the problems that some people have experienced on Matrix that we might even have talked about on Matrix Live before about stuck notifications or stuck unread states. So um, if the server and the client disagree about which message came first, then they might also disagree about whether a read receipt saying you've read a message is referring to the latest message or some earlier message. And when the server and the client disagree about it, that's when you end up with stuck notifications and stuck unread messages. And it's actually particularly bad in threads. The reason it's particularly bad in threads is because generally, when you're displaying threads to a user, you don't use the sync API, you use a different API. So you're getting the messages potentially, only sometimes potentially, in a different order, which means that knowing what the kind of correct order is for messages in a thread is particularly difficult. And that's why threads suffer sometimes from problems with whether they're read or not, and whether there's a notification in
All right. So, is it possible to do something about that?
there. Well, I hope so. Like it really seems difficult. Like, so you would have thought the answer would just be, well, just use the same order instead of using different orders.
right?
Um, but that's really difficult. So the order that is used right now for fetching historical messages is actually a kind of mathematically sensible order. It's an order that is based purely on uh, the kind of abstract conceptual structure of messages arriving at the server. So if two servers have got all the same messages as each other, they should give you the messages back in the same order as each other. Um, and that's a really cool property because, as I was saying earlier, like matrix is all distributed and it's difficult to do stuff like that. But the price that we pay for that cool property is that the order that you get them in is weird. It and it can change under you. So because it's just based on these abstract mathematical properties, if we change the graph of messages, we add some more that change the properties of that graph, you might find the messages you've already seen are suddenly in a different order. So one of the big things I argue in that blog post is we shouldn't use this cool mathematically right order. We should use a much more dumb uh, but practical order, which is effectively the order the messages arrived at my server. So that means that you're going to disagree with a different server, so that's a real downside. But the upside is for anyone writing code that fetches messages from the matrix server, they can just page forward and backward through a very consistent list of all the messages that they've seen, and nothing changes underneath them. And that's good for users, that like for people using Matrix, that things don't change after they've seen them. It's also really good for people writing those clients. Means that it's much easier to avoid bugs with notifications and unread stuff. Um, uh, and there was something else I was going to say that I've forgotten.
All right. So is it really a problem? So in theory, that can be a problem, that you don't have a consistent order across servers. In practice, what does it take for that to happen?
Yeah, so yeah, the times when you would see a different order from your friend who's using a different server would not, well, there would be some very minor differences. If you both said something at almost exactly the same time, then your two servers might disagree and think that the thing that happened closest to them happened first. So that could happen fairly frequently, and that you see in lots of messaging systems, um, in different systems. The other situation where things could get really weird looking is if there's some kind of breakdown of the communication between those servers. They lose their internet connection between each other or completely, and then they join up later. And at that moment, they're going to have a completely different view of the world. And in the past, we've tried to kind of um, say that Matrix can recover from that type of situation, which it absolutely can. But I think we've also tried to kind of pretend that it didn't happen. But I actually think it's better for users to make it clear that it did happen, right? And that actually, um, like, so that we're not like kind of lying to the users about these events happened ages ago. They did happen ages ago, but you didn't see them. So I actually think it's more valuable to show them to you later when you did see them, and not kind of readjust the order later to make it look like they happened in the past, when from your point of view, they knew. So all of this means all of this chatter needs to come to some kind of practical thing. So, for a long time, as someone trying to fix read receipts, I was saying to people who write the servers, please can you like just make this problem go away? And the people writing the servers said to me, no, it's impossible. Um, so I was like, right, okay, it's impossible, is it? So by changing the boundaries of the problem, I've found a way that is possible. And the biggest compromise, as we mentioned, is that people on different servers will see different orders. But by changing the constraints of the problem, I found, I think, a thing that is possible, which is this thing that I've called stitched order. So stitched order is essentially the idea that I just said earlier, which is the messages get shown to the client in approximately the order they arrived at my server. But of course, it's more complicated than that, and I was skipping over some details, which is always the case. And the reason why it's more complicated than that is because servers don't always have all of the messages. So sometimes a server knows that there's some kind of gap in their own history in the past, and they can fetch those messages from another server when they want to by doing something called backfilling. So when those messages arrive at my server, because I asked for some old messages and I get given them, it doesn't make sense for those messages to appear as if they were brand new, because I actually fetched them because I knew they were in the past and I wanted the user scrolled upwards and wanted them. So those messages need to be stitched into the order in the correct place. And that's actually where it gets really difficult and horrible. So I've designed a not at all perfect, but it seems to work, algorithm for how to stitch those messages into history without it making too much, without it looking too weird when you look at that order. I've written a little prototype that kind of proves that it doesn't do anything too bad in the bad examples I've thought of. There's all kinds of weird cases where a message is before something and also after something else, but those two things are the opposite order in the order already. So like there's all kinds of weird cases. So I don't, the stitched order algorithm that I've come up with along with Rich, um, it doesn't attempt to like make every hard problem come up with a sensible order. It just gives you a consistent order, which might be weird if things are weird, but it won't change over time. So that means that you get the fundamental property that when a client's asking for events from the server, it gets them in a consistent order every time. It doesn't get confused by sometimes they're in one order, then they move around, or sometimes they're in a different order.
So that could solve a lot of the client-side UX issues, even if it's not mathematically correct. It's not, it doesn't really make sense to say that. So you said that the servers might disagree depending on when they receive the message. Would it be possible to achieve consistent order across servers, and is it worth the effort?
So if you assume that eventually two servers have all the same messages as each other, then so if you assume two servers do have all the same messages as each other, then you certainly can have an order that they should use to provide those messages that is the same for both of them, right? You say essentially ignore all the information you have about when the message arrived and only use the kind of mathematical structure of which messages before which other one. And you come up with an order that is consistent, but it's basically not useful, right? So it's useful for some things perhaps, but it's not useful for displaying those messages on a user's computer, because the one property of that order is that messages will keep appearing in the past and not telling you that they appeared. And another property is you can't tell people about live brand new messages in that order, because by definition, like live new messages may not be on all the other servers in the world. And in fact, the matrix is even more weird than that, because basically that some server that you've never heard of might eventually appear and start giving you messages like 10 years later. So how long do you wait to get the perfect order before you actually give the messages to the client? Essentially, you have to wait forever. So it's just not compatible with the normal use of a matrix client, which is I want to know what someone said 5 seconds ago. So yeah, so yes, you can have a globally consistent order, but no, it's not really much use for making a matrix client.
Well, I really appreciate that you took the time to have a very product-driven vision of how history should look like, and not just consider things from a very back-endy, mathematical, cold perspective. And actually, what we do matters to people because people use the product. So it's important to understand how they work. You mentioned an algorithm, but actually you wrote even more than that. You wrote a proto-MSC. Is that how we could call that? Can people have a look at the MSC?
Yeah, yeah. I also probably also potentially importantly, I wrote a bunch of test cases. So I designed like a text file format for describing scenarios. Like I got these messages and then later I got these messages. What should the order look like? So the idea of those test cases is someone implementing this algorithm in whatever system can use those test cases and check that their implementation fits with the one that I provided. If they want to use my algorithm, they don't have to use my algorithm. But yeah, the MSC, I'm sure you'll be able to link to the repository. It's probably not far away from being turned into a real MSC. So when that happens, I'll like delete all the text from the link that you give out, and I'll just point you to the real MSC so we don't have confusion. But yeah, I'm working on it in a separate repository, partly because I wrote a load of code to support this thing, and partly because I'm not sure that my MSC makes much sense yet, so I'm getting some feedback before I put it in.
All right. Is this something you are doing in your free time, or is this something you're doing on behalf of Element?
Yeah, this is something I'm doing as an employee of Element, but I'm just squeezing it in between the other things I'm doing. No one is. Well, people are saying to me, this sounds useful, you should pursue it, but no one's saying, okay, you can spend 8 hours a week on it or something like that. I'm just finding time for it in between. But yeah, it's very much part of in Element's interest, obviously, to have Matrix clients work really well.
Right, so Element is very interested in that, but doesn't have the bandwidth to let you spend as much time as you would need to get to a very polished state right now. So maybe if somebody is watching this video and it matters really to them or their organization to get this problem solved, they can get in touch with somebody at Element to get more of your time spent on that.
Maybe, or maybe not my time. So the the next step to turn this into an MSC that someone might be interested in approving would be to attempt some implementation in some servers. So I've actually split it into multiple MSCs, and the first MSC has no effect at all on clients. And then there's a second MSC saying we should expose the information about these gaps that I was talking about to clients. So in terms of the first MSC, if someone was interested in trying to implement this in Synapse or some other matrix server, one of the requirements for an MSC to be approved or even really properly considered is that someone's implemented it somewhere and shown that it could actually work. So if someone's interested in doing that implementation, that would be very helpful and interesting.
What's the best place for them to reach out to you if they want to do an implementation and talk with you about whether the implementation makes sense or not?
Yeah, it'd be totally fine to talk to me on Matrix. I'm sure you can put my Matrix ID in the description.
All right. So in the description, I need to add a link to the blog posts you posted a long time ago, talking about history, a link to the code and proto MSC you have on Codeberg, and your Matrix ID so people can reach out to you. All right.
Awesome.
Is there anything else the world needs to know about all that?
I really feel like there was something I thought wanted to say. No, I can't think of it. All right. Well, all the stuff is in the Codebug repository. There's a bunch of code. There's the MSC prototype MSC there, and yeah, I just welcome discussion from people and thoughts and ideas about how to improve this or how to get it implemented.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Andy, for your time, and thank you very much for tackling those difficult problems. And I see you next week, Matrix Live.
Bye.
All right.